This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking engine revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With hundreds of athletes, entrepreneurs, speakers, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent for your next event. For more information, please visit letsengage.com. Welcome to another edition, the Veterans Day special edition of the Impact Podcast. This is truly a special edition. It's 32 years in the making. I'll get into why in a second, but we've got the ultimate veteran badass with us today. He's an adventure explorer, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and author, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I've got his book right here. I've read it twice, actually. We've got Dean Stott. Welcome to the Impact Podcast, Dean Stott.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, this is an honor, and thank you for being with us. You know, Dean, before I get asking you questions about your fascinating and truly inspiring journey, both in the military and outside of the military, can you share your background a little bit? Just tee it up in terms of military family, going into the military, becoming basically one of the top people in the world with regards to skill sets and what you accomplished there, and then after the military. Give a little bit of your bio first.
Of course, yeah. I'll probably start at the beginning. As you mentioned, I was born into a military family myself. My father was in the military. Both my grandparents were in the military as well. So I grew up in a town called Aldershot, which in the UK is the home of the British Army. So I was immersed in that military environment. Where I went to school, the airborne regiments used to parachute into our field. It wasn't strange to see helicopters flying over the schools and guys jumping out the skies. So I was very much immersed in that environment. As a young boy, I always wanted to be a fireman. Always wanted to be a firefighter. But I got to the age of 17, left school, and there wasn't really much employment going on. So I thought, well, maybe the military is a potential option for me. So I approached my father and I told him of my intentions. And he gave me those warm, comforting words that I would last 2 minutes. It probably wasn't the response I was actually expecting, but at 9.5 stone and 5'7", I could probably see where he was coming from. So I generally believe there's no point in arguing with someone till you're blue in the face. I just thought, well, I'll go away and I'll prove him wrong. And I did that. I joined the military at 17. My father was in the Royal Engineers, and I also joined the Royal Engineers as well to get a trade and something back. And by the age of 21, I was a para, commando, a diver, a PTI. I'd done every arduous course in the Royal Engineers that was open to me. So the only other path for me then was UK Special Forces. So I pretty much put to bed any doubts of my father that I'd last 2 minutes. But coming from an army background, the normal transition for us is the Special Air Service. But the Special Boat Service had just opened their doors up, tri-service. Prior to that, you had to be Marines. It was 100% Marines. So I applied for UK Special Forces selection for the Special Boat Service. Just so your listeners are aware, the course is exactly the same. The SAS and the SBS do the same 6-month course together. So much to the disgust of my friends in the Army and the SAS, I went down the SBS route, and I was fortunate 6 months later to be selected and became one of the first Army guys ever to go Special Boat Service. And I think now, 15 years on, something like 15 to 20% of the SBS are now Army recruits. So, being one of the first to sort of open those floodgates. But again, it sort of goes with that theme that if you tell me I can't do it, it just gives me more fire in my belly to prove you wrong.
One of the themes in your great book, and again, this book is just amazing for our listeners and now viewers out there. Dean Stott's Relentless, from SBS to World Record Breaker, and I've marked this book up and I've written all over it. And one of the important themes I took out of this, Dean, and you tell me if I'm wrong. When people tell you you can't, and they put a chip on your shoulder, you take a chip, you make it a boulder on your shoulder, and then you proceed. You literally take that chip and you make it much bigger than it is in your mind, and you lean in and you go.
Yeah, I don't take it personally. People are always trying to compare you. either to themselves or people they've seen in the past. But you're unique. You're one of a kind. So there's no point in me trying to sit there and argue with them and prove them wrong verbally. The best way to do it is through actions. So it's just take on board what they said, use that as almost fire and energy. That negative energy I then turn into positive energy. And when it does get a bit hard, you always remember what they were saying. And then you come back, successful, and you don't need to say anything. Your actions have spoke volumes.
For our listeners out there that want to find Dean, that want to have him speak at one of their events or buy his book on Amazon or Audible, you go to www.deanstott.com. Dean, talk a little bit about your experiences in the military and really the badass stuff you're doing. I'm going to a page in the book which comes down to just life, and I love this line here that you said in terms of some of the tighter moments you got into while you're in the military. This sentence here: my call. When it comes down to it, the biggest moments in your life always are. The accountability and the personal accountability that you take for everything you do. My call. That there is a whole book to be written just on that issue. Talk a little bit about your experiences and how you made the right decisions most of the time during your military experience.
Yeah, I think the reason we're one of the best militaries in the world and special forces is because we're always learning from our mistakes. It's not because we're the best caliber and the best training. So we're always in these various scenarios. So I always believe, you can't be experienced without experiences. So obviously some of those situations, maybe earlier on in my career, I would have made the wrong call, but I'd learned from that and then I'd never make that mistake again. But the accountability is a big one. And I know the story that you're referring to there. I was in a situation where I was dressed up as a local Taliban in Kandahar, and I'd missed, obviously without giving too much away, I misread the situation, but it was on my call. I thought I'd been compromised and there was a threat from the general public. And what was great about that is obviously talking back to HQ through the radio, it's on your call. They can't question your decision because they're not in your seat. You're the only person in that position. You've got the atmospherics, you're feeling the pressures, that you shouldn't be there. But always, and that's why I always say you need to step back and look in. A lot of people rush in and make the wrong decision. And I think that's what I did with that. Thankfully, I then found out they were making me aware that my turban was stuck in the door, whereas actually I just misinterpreted the whole scenario. But, should I had made the wrong decision, I'm accountable for my decision, but that's what I saw on the ground and that's how I read it. No one else back in UK or back in HQ could question my decision. And that's the reason we go through such arduous training, because you are making key decisions, which can have really bad consequences if gone wrong.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your experiences in the military, other experiences. You were involved with counterterrorism and all sorts of fascinating situations. How long was your career in the military? And share a couple of your favorite anecdotes.
Yeah, so I joined the military at 17. When I joined the Special Forces at the age of 28, I joined at the height of the war on terror. It was the busiest time for UK Special Forces. So I was, out in the Middle East on operations. I'd be diving off cartel boats in Colombia, or I'd be rescuing hostages off the east coast of Africa. I was literally living and breathing what these children nowadays play on Call of Duty. That was my lifestyle. Obviously, because of security reasons, I can't go into too much detail on some of the operations, but it was very vast. I did 16 years in total, and whether it was in the Special Forces, whether in the military, everything, I just enjoyed it. What I really took away from the military, we talk about the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, that if you're going to do something, you do it to the best of your ability, which I think is a great ethos, because it's not just in military or sport. It could be in anything you do, whether you're a carpenter, whether you're an accountant, you just give it to your 100%. I did enjoy the humor. The military have a very dark sense of humor, and I think you need to have a dark sense of humor because you're in certain scenarios and situations which if you took it too seriously, it would play on your mind mentally. So having that, but my father, I mentioned, is a big part of my life. He was when he was in the military, he was the army sorry, not football, soccer, the army soccer coach and manager. So he was very competitive, and I had a competitive streak from him, and I loved that about the military. I just found myself, I didn't feel threatened by others, but I was just competing internally against others, and you're in a great environment of other competitors, other athletes as well. So yeah, I really soaked it up. I genuinely thought I would only do about 2 or 3 years in the military, and then 16 years later, unfortunately, I had to leave prematurely because of the parachuting accident.
Share a little bit about that crazy accident, because it bears discussing. You had to overcome a lot just to survive the problem that happened when you were jumping out of that airplane.
That was it. Yeah, we were due to go back out to Afghanistan, and we're on pre-deployment training out in Oman, and we were doing what's called a hey-ho jump, a high altitude, high opening jump, which is a method of insertion that we use. And I think it was the third or fourth jump of the day, and I'd done hundreds of these jumps before. And you exit the aircraft at 15,000 feet, so you're on the limits of oxygen, and then the parachute opens straight away. I mean, you travel up to 50 kilometers or 30 minutes flying time in the air to get to your
Wow.
designated area. So it's just normal procedure. And I think it was the fourth jump of the day, exited the aircraft, and unlike the other jumps, my legs got blown up above my head as I exited the aircraft, and my leg
Oh.
got caught in the line above my head. So my first concern was to clear the leg in time before the parachute opened. I couldn't free it in time, and then the parachute went taut and opened behind me. My leg got pulled up over my head and to the right, and thankfully my leg did release. If it didn't, it could have come completely off. But
Oh.
straight away, with the pain, I knew there was a problem. The pain was that severe that I was vomiting through the pain. But
Oh.
because of the altitude, I was also drifting in and out of consciousness. The rest of the team were unaware there was a situation at this point. So my first concern was to stay with the team, get to the DZ, but also land it, because you've got one bad leg and you need to try and land it well. There's obviously risk of damaging the other leg.
Right.
I approached the DZ. I saw the approach of the other parachutists, and I gauged the winds correctly, and I landed perfectly on one leg. But unfortunately, the damage sustained ended my career. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus within the knee,
Oh.
my hamstring, my quad, and my calf muscle as well. So all the supporting muscles around the knee as well. So unfortunately, after 16 years, that was the end of my career. And for me, that was a real, now in reflection, looking back, that was a big period in my life, probably a dark period in my life. Everything I'd known from a young boy, growing up in that military environment and then joining the military itself. The military is very good. They're like your mother, your father. They clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. You don't care what sort of tax you're paying. You're just doing the job that you love. And to then sort of be told, thank you for your service, you're no longer required. I went through what is known as an identity crisis. You've gone from working in a tight-knit unit, in a team, part of a tribe, and then basically told to leave. And how do I now fit in society? What are my skill sets? What is my role or purpose? So that was the first obstacle I had to overcome.
Well, and let's go back to that injury. I don't want to just overlook that injury. Any of the things you just mentioned on their own is a very, very bad deal. Meniscus tear, ACL full tear. You had compounded injuries to your leg, which I just want to review here, because when we go on to some of your other massive and beyond inspiring accomplishments, I don't want to overlook
Yeah.
how long did it take you to get well just from your injuries?
So initially, it was the same time as the volcanic ash from Iceland, which had just shut down all air traffic globally. So I was in Oman. The gold scenario would be to fly straight back to UK and start physio straight away, because there is chance that you can rebuild it. You see rugby players who tear ACLs but
Right,
continue training, but obviously they have their other supporting muscles, which I didn't have.
right.
My first obstacle, I had 4 weeks in a hotel in Oman just on painkillers, because there was no flights available to get me home. I finally got back to UK. I think it was about 6 weeks later. I got to the hospital already. You can see the muscle wastage in the leg. Got sent home, came back another 6 weeks later. They then lost my MRI scans, and there was then a spiral of other medical issues. And it actually took me 44 weeks before I got operated on.
44 weeks after the accident.
44 weeks after the accident. I tore my lateral meniscus probably about 8 years before, and I was operated on within 72 hours and back running. It just tells you the difference, the scale. So that obviously contributed to obviously me leaving as well, which was sad really, because I do love the military. I love promoting the military, and you almost left under a bit of a dark cloud, the fact that your medical was neglected. But for me, I just picked myself up and we just carried on. Yeah.
Was it harder for the doctors to help you if they had operated much sooner post-accident versus 44 weeks? Would have things gone easier and better for you just personally?
Yeah, potentially I may still be in. You
Right.
never know. You
You
never
never
know.
know. Okay, so now you're out. You're out of the bubble, the tribe, the what you were used to for all those years. You're
Yeah.
out of the military, and now you had to find a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to find myself. And also, to add to the pressure, my wife was also 8 months pregnant. So not only are you stepping into a new world, my wife was 8 months pregnant. I hear, you hear stories of people's transitioning to civilian street. Some
Right.
can be quite smooth and some can be quite turbulent. No, thankfully for me, mine was quite smooth. My wife is very entrepreneurial. She was business, last year was a runner-up businesswoman entrepreneur of the year UK. And, she was a bank manager running a few banks when I met her. So she set up my first security company on her BlackBerry watching TV. For me, it's like, I think it's like 3 months of paperwork. So she took away a lot of those potentially additional pressures that were put on me. And my focus was just to try and find work. But yes, with her being 8 months pregnant, I didn't know whether there was any work out there, and there's plenty of work anyway. And without sounding like Liam Neeson, people with our skill sets, our natural progression is the private security sector. So it was a natural step for me. Within 48 hours, I was out in Libya, in Benghazi, during the height of the Arab Spring in May 2011. And Gaddafi was now in Tripoli. He'd been cordoned. But soon as I hit the ground in Libya, I soon identified that the Libyans didn't want it being another repeat of Afghanistan or Iraq. Once Gaddafi had fallen, they wanted to take control of their country. They didn't want private security companies walking around with weapons, etc. Also, some of the big private security companies, and they were charging six-figure sums for these crisis managements and evacuation plans for NGOs, for the oil and gas and else. But when I started scraping the surface, I soon identified that actually there was nothing in place itself. So that got the cogs going in my head. For me, I wanted to find a niche within the industry. I didn't want to just work with a private security company. With my sort of mindset, I want to strive to be the best that I can be. So I flew home 2 weeks later. My wife gave birth to our daughter, Molly. And I said, look, do you mind if I take some life savings out the account? And she said, yeah, what's your thoughts? So I told her. So I flew back into Libya and I bought 30 weapons on the black market, because there was a huge proliferation of weapons at this point. And I just buried them between Tunis and Egypt and spent a month on my own in the desert, just writing my own evacuation plans, burying weapons, communications kit, and money. And that's what I did. I then sold it to some of the oil and gas sector and just monitored that. My sort of main passion, or my main drive within the private security sector was the corporate industry, was the close protection. So, the great thing about the security industry is very similar to the military. When you tell people you're in the security industry, I think they think you're a doorman from the local nightclub. It's a very diverse sector as well.
Right.
Surveillance, close protection, coaching or mentoring, the lot. So every time I got a phone call, it was a different job, whether it's taking the UAE Royal Family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives, whether it was training the Kurdish special forces to fight ISIS. Then the next phone call would be to go to the World Cup in Brazil. It was a great industry, and I was enjoying it. I just finished the London Olympics in 2012, and I was out in Libya again in Benghazi. And it was September 11th, 2012, and it was the evening that the American ambassador got killed in Benghazi. I think they made a film called 13 Hours.
Right.
I don't know whether it's right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, but I was in the city that evening, and I was asked if I could help a German oil company get their engineers safely back to Tripoli. So I got 8 German engineers safely through safe houses that I had in the desert and got them home safely. Because of the success of that, 2 years later, I was in Brazil covering the World Cup, and it was called the Tripoli War, which is a civil war between the militia and the government, which is still ongoing at the moment. And I got a phone call at the Canadian embassy. We're now stuck in Tripoli and couldn't get out. And my name kept coming up, and they said, "This is the guy you need to speak to." And I work on my own. Everything I do, I work on my own. So I flew back in. I had a great fixer. And I came in and I just sat down with them, and I helped them plan and got them out. So I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats from Libya to Tunisia. And it sounds very sexy and it sounds very Hollywood, but actually I've never had to dig up any of my weapons. They're all in position. The actual success of this was understanding the political influences, the tribal influences, the demographics of the country, not going in, with a load of guys with a load of weapons and just bullying our way through. It's actually all about communication, speaking to the right people and letting them know our intentions. So the British embassy the week before got shot at every checkpoint that they'd gone through, which obviously was spooking the Canadians. So myself and my fixer went out. We didn't speak to the guards. We spoke to the tribal elders responsible for that region. And actually it was all about communication and respect, just letting them know who we are, that we were no threat and what our intentions were. And that's pretty much my approach in the private security sector. It's not about being passive aggressive in image. It's about having respect and being more discreet and non-intrusive, but just keeping those lines of communication open.
Dean, a couple things. First of all, it does sound Hollywood, but it also sounds fantastically dangerous. Okay. I mean, this sounds very dangerous. Is this called, help me out. This is, again, from my Hollywood knowledge and also some friends. Is that what is called a hot extraction?
Yeah, it can be called a hot extraction, but for me, this was when the pin dropped for the second time for me. I came home from this trip and I had blood on my shirt, and I said to my wife, my normal procedure when I got home was to wash my clothes, repack my clothes, ready for the next phone call. And I said to my wife, "Can we get the blood out my shirt?" And I had blood in the shirt because I was administering first aid on an RTA, a road traffic accident at the border. And my wife said, "Yes, we can get the blood out, but I'm more intrigued in how the blood was there." And so I told her what I'd just done, and she sat back and said, "Have you heard yourself?" For me, it was almost a throwaway comment that I just evacuated the Canadian, but that was my life at this point. But the pin dropped when my wife then highlighted I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. Chapter 16 in the book's called Dead or Divorced, and I think that's where we are here. But what it was is I was actually trying to match the adrenaline rush I had when I was still in the Special Forces.
Right.
Having to come to terms mentally that you're no longer in that group. You no longer have that support network above you, the government, the helicopters, the aircraft. So yeah, that was a real eye opener for me. But I just got so immersed in working in those countries, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and I just felt comfortable in those countries when in fact, now looking back, yes, it was quite dangerous.
Before we get on, for our listeners out there who've just joined us, we've got Dean Stott with us. He's a veteran of the British Special Forces. He's an adventure explorer, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and he's an author of this amazing book. Look at how many places I've marked it up here. I'm so fascinated. There's so many things I need to ask him about. And I bought a couple cases for my company and for our listeners out there. This book has so much in it for everybody. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it in Audible. Also on deanstott.com, www.deanstott.com. Dead or divorced, one of the themes through this great book, and you actually had a line in your book that said, "No man is an island." Your wife, Alana, has been not only your cheerleader and supporter,
Yeah.
but she's your teammate
Yeah.
in almost in every chapter she shows up, whether through encouragement or coming up with, as you said, the business model post military, the support. We're going to talk about her throwing the Guinness World Book of Records on your lap in a minute or so, but finding that adrenaline, that rush that you were so used to with that whole military around you in the private sector
Yeah.
is a quest that is so fascinating. And I think you're still on it. You're a very young man still, which is the fun part of your life. You know, but your wife is truly a special human being and been a heck of a partner. And I think that shouldn't get lost in the messaging here, in that anyone to accomplish the greatness you have, the fact that you chose such a wonderful person to be your partner, I think is such an important message that our listeners hear out there. So anyway, hats off to your wife, Alana. I hope I get to meet her one day, but man, she shows up in this book in so many ways and is such a huge support of yours. I'm so impressed by how you guys have operated together as a team
Yeah.
to succeed over and over again.
No, I think I'm very fortunate. Like I said, I felt there was a void when I left the military, being in a tight knit unit in a team, and then actually then found it closer to home. It was actually here all the time. It was just I wasn't aware of it. And as I mentioned, Lana's very entrepreneurial. Anyone who knows us as a family knows that basically Alana's the one behind driving. She's the one who's managing everything. And we know our strengths and weaknesses. Mine's more the physical, and Alana's very much more the mental. So
That's
we just
okay.
yeah.
You got it both covered. So now on to the next mission.
Yeah.
Pursuing in a relentless way excellence, and being relentless in your pursuit of excellence, and that adrenal rush. Talk a little bit about how you and Alana came up with the most fascinating uh, Pan American Highway Challenge that you created and you obviously killed. But I want you to share the story behind the story.
Yeah. So obviously, after the Canadian embassy and Alana and I chatted, we then soon realized it was actually lack of communication between ourselves. She thought I wanted to go away all the time, and I thought that she needed me to go away, to bring in the money. And Alana is now a property developer, and she said, "Well, no, I don't need you to go away. We're very comfortable back home. Why don't you just hang up your boots for a bit and do that?" So I thought, perfect. I'll do that. Why not? And during this whole period, it's probably about 5 years now from the injury to where we're at this stage, I'd neglected my own physical and mental well-being because I'd been so fixated on the work, just the work and helping others, that my injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage.
Oh.
So I decided to buy a push bike and just cycle to and from the office. It's only about 8 miles there and 8 miles back. And I thought, well, perfect. But straight away, just being active again, I felt a huge weight off my shoulders. In where I got to in the military because of my physical attributes, that had been taken away from me, that I couldn't run anymore. So actually being on a bike, I felt that, doing some sort of cardiovascular, I felt a lot better. So I just cycled to and from the office, and I spent a month with Alana doing these property developing. And you can imagine with my backstory, sat in these architects and planners meetings, I wasn't really interested in the plumbing system. It was more the coffee and the biscuits. And Alana could see that glaze over my eyes. She's like, right, you need to do something, but obviously not smuggling people across borders. So it was about a month before my 40th birthday. And as a young child, I always read the Guinness Book of Records. I was always fascinated in these people's, these feats. And I said, well, I've always fancied doing a record. And she said, well, what in? And I said, well, why not cycling? No, cycling doesn't seem to be hampering my injury. I was always conscious of my injury and what could potentially, hold me up. And I said, well, cycling doesn't seem to be an issue. So I was thinking, more. I lived in Scotland at the time. I was thinking maybe, the length of Scotland. And then my wife then found the world's longest road, which runs from the southern point of Argentina to northern Alaska, which is 22,000 kilometers. So she clearly wanted me out of the house. And so just so the listeners are aware, because of the curvature of the Earth, it's equivalent to cycling from London to Sydney and then another 4,000 miles. And I thought, perfect. That's the perfect challenge for me. And So having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for the Guinness World Record. And Guinness came back 6 weeks later and said, yes, you've been successful on your application. So I thought, perfect. But during this period as well, when I left the military, I was doing a lot for charities. I was a Special Boat Service ambassador for Scotland. I'm an ambassador for the Royal British Legion. I did a lot with regards to military charity. So for me, rather than just doing a challenge, I wanted to obviously, I always like to give back through philanthropy or raise awareness. So I'm going to massively name drop now. So I rang a good friend of mine who's Prince Harry. Him and I had known each other we've known each other 13 years now. And him and I had done a lot of stuff with charity together before, behind closed doors. And so I rang him up and I said, look, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road. I said, what charity should we do it for? This was back in 2016.
Right.
So himself, his brother, and Kate, they were just about to launch a campaign called Heads Together, which was about mental health. So I sat down with Harry. I was aware of mental health within the military. I'd seen it firsthand with some of my friends and obviously, experienced it myself. But I wasn't aware how big an issue it was throughout the whole of society, be it postnatal depression, young children, teenagers, all the way to fully grown adults. It affects everyone. It doesn't discriminate at all. So I thought, well, that's the perfect challenge, the campaign for this challenge. And that was the birth of PAH 18. So Harry then introduced me to the Royal Foundation and we started the dialogue. The first meeting was, well, how much are you planning to raise? And I said, well, £1 million, because I wanted to keep them at the table. I didn't want them feeling, well,
right.
Why are we here for £10,000? And for me, the enormity of the challenge had to replicate how much we're trying to raise.
Makes sense.
And then the second question that got posed was, what is the message you're trying to promote? And I was like, and I hadn't really thought about it because I was like, well, Harry had asked me. And so I sat down for a minute and I said, well, physical activity helps your mental state. And they're like, oh, no, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? And they said, because it's not been scientifically proven. And I said, well, that's fine, but I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm physically active. So I ignored them anyway and carried on promoting that message. And that was the message I was trying to promote this challenge. So with mental health, there's 3 coping mechanisms. One is medication, which you try to avoid. Communication is a big one. But for me, it was about the physical activity. It's finding yourself again. So that was the start of the PAH project.
And so, okay, good. And we're gonna talk about how that turned out, because I know the ending because I've read your book now twice. But I want to go. So now you started cycling. You had a goal.
Yeah.
You knew what the mission was.
Yeah.
These 22,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
You also had a financial goal. You put the £1 million on the line.
Yeah.
What's next here? What happens? Start the journey for us. How do you even like figure out? I mean, obviously you've always figured out who the right specialists are, but how do you figure out where you start, how you traverse this? That's the planning on this is just fascinating.
But that's where I going into this, I wasn't a cyclist, but coming from the special forces, coming from the private security, the success of those operations was down to that meticulous planning and detail. So straight away, it's just pen to paper. What is the objective? This is the start point. This is the objective. And I just took a military set of orders and just put it on the challenge. I just crossed out ammunition, and then there's two elements of the challenge. There's the physical element, achieving the aim, and then there's the monetary element, trying to raise that money. And I think the monetary is even harder than the physical. So again, Alana was the campaign director. She sort of helped assist with all the sponsorship as well. So for me, I was doing the planning. I know 14 countries, and there's a lot more to it than just grabbing a water bottle and a banana and cycling north. There's so many things you need to consider. Security issues, seasons, what time of the year you're going through. You're going through country in the middle of elections. Could there be any
dangerous
unrest? Yeah, there's so many factors you wouldn't really think about, but these are normal sub factors that I always consider when I'm doing operations around the world. And so I just put all that down to paper. But again, one of the things we did in the special forces, which I thought was great, was it's called a hot debrief. So as soon as we came off the ground or whatever we were doing, before we'd even go, clean ourselves up, clean our weapons, anything else, you'd have a hot debrief. And the three questions were, what worked? What didn't work? And if you were going to do it again, what would you do differently? And so we're always learning and always evolving. And so I thought, I was reading magazines and books about the Pan American Highway and learning about cycling. But for me, it was, I thought, well, the best people to ask are those that have done it before you.
Yeah.
So I approached the previous record holders and I posed those three questions to them. And I gauged my plan on that. So they all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina.
Wow.
All their issues were in Central and South America, be it political unrest, bureaucracy at the borders, languages, spares for the bikes. So for me, as a military man or a planner, I thought, well, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? Why not address those issues early, get them out the way, and then when you get to North America and Canada, you're in a good position. So one of the proudest things I did is I actually did the opposite of everyone else. I turned it on its head and I said, well, that's my start point. My start point now is Argentina and not Alaska, which then changed the times of the years of when I needed to cycle. So, that was the first part. I then, as a soldier, I've been to the desert, I've been to the Arctic, I've been to the jungle. Some of the areas I was going through, it went from plus 47 degrees centigrade to minus 18 on the challenge. The Atacama Desert in Chile is 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And I've done that in the desert, but I've not done it 8 to 10 hours on a bike. So when I was training, I thought, well, how can I replicate those environments? So I flew out to Dubai, did 2 weeks heat training out there so I could satisfy myself that,
you were ready.
Yeah, I was ready. Central America is 100% humidity. I had a friend who had a CrossFit gym out in Thailand, so spent 2 weeks out there training. And for altitude wise, there's a center down in London called the Altitude Center. The room is simulated at altitude. So the biggest climb on the Tour de France is about 21 to 23 kilometers. My biggest climb was 67 kilometers from sea level to 4,500 meters in a day. So it was literally everything on steroids. So I did a 10-hour static bike ride in the Altitude Center to, again, tick the box that, I'm comfortable in those environments. So that was sort of things that were going on in the background in regards to my training. The money side, as you mentioned, living in Scotland, I was having to fly down to London a lot to meet potential sponsors, to meet, the charities as well. And you can imagine how difficult it is going into some of these blue chip companies, standing in front of the board and saying, well, I've never cycled before, but I'm going to cycle the world's longest roads, break a world record and raise £1 million for mental health. I think a lot of them thought I had mental health problems myself and showed me the door. But thankfully, this was 2017 and the Heads Together campaign had now launched in UK. So it was very much a topic of conversation. And then a lot of the corporates wanted to get behind it, their corporate social responsibilities. As well. So it was very much, I was going that way as corporates wanted to get involved. And then I clashed at the right time with a FTSE 100 wealth management company. And, we had the conversation. I told them what I was doing and they sort of looked beyond me. They believed in everything I said. They said, even we know you're not a cyclist, but we believe you're going to do it. So that helped a lot for me. At this point, I was using my own money. I put £50,000 of my own money to get it up and running to where it should be. Because people have to believe that you're going to do it. And one of the sort of me putting my own money is a big thing. They thought, well, if he's put his own money in, then we believe he's going to do it. So that helped.
How much of a support group was on the journey with you in terms of, a travel team and things of that such supporting you?
Yeah, so I sort of looked at, I wasn't a cyclist and we sort of at beginning stage, so Harry and I did a promo video together and we were getting requests from all over the world of assistance, so I needed like a bike mechanic, I needed a soft tissue therapist, I needed a medic and things like that so that I could just concentrate on the cycling. And, we had these guys come forward and assist us, but hindsight's a great thing. I thought people were doing it for the right reasons and it wasn't the case. So I always joked that the bike ride was the easiest part of the challenge. as it started evolving, the medic on day 13, I had to send home because he was bullying the documentary team. The mechanic, the soft tissue therapists in Mexico wanted to promote their businesses and sort of hijack the campaign name. And I'm like, and they said, well, you can't do it without us. So I left them in Mexico and cycled with my friend who was driving the vehicle. So, I didn't, things you don't really factor
Right.
on paper, managing people's egos. So
Right.
moving forward, everything has to be contracts and NDAs and things like that. So yeah, but I just assumed that yes, they were doing it for the right reasons and they're the professionals, and in the end, it wasn't the case.
So let's talk about three goals here. The goal was to get through these 14,000, get through this whole Pan American Highway.
Yeah.
And then the £1,000,000. Yeah. And then also, what was your timeline? Share with our audience your timeline that you were shooting for to beat that record.
Yeah. So when I applied for the world record, originally it was 117 days when Guinness, when Guinness came back to me 6 weeks later and said, you've been successful, it had already been beaten. No, sorry, it was 124 days, sorry, when I applied.
Right.
When they came back 6 weeks later, it had already been beaten. It was now 117 days. So for me, when I was doing my planning, I was looking at potential scenarios and contingencies, but there were certain things that were out of my control, be it, as we touched about, natural disasters, coups, third-party influence. So I thought, well, we use a thing called fudge in the military. We give ourselves a bit of fudge. So I said, well, I'm going to aim for 110 days. So not because I wanted to smash it by a week, but should we encounter any of those situations, it's eating into that fudge. It's not eating into my record time. So that was always my target, 110 days. I took 10 days off the South America world record and did it in 48 days. The original record was 58 days, which is great. So my decision to go south to north was a great decision because I had a tailwind through Peru, which is 2,500 kilometers. Logistically wasn't a good decision. You can get a vehicle from Alaska down to Argentina, not a problem. Coming the other way, we had to swap vehicles in every country, which was slowing us up on the borders. So Alana, being the campaign director, decided, right, well, we'll buy an RV and a 4x4 and get it shipped from Fort Lauderdale down to Panama. So when I fly over from Cartagena, those vehicles will take us all the way to the end. So that was the plan. And Alana got a phone call 2 weeks before I was coming into the end of South America saying that the vehicles hadn't been loaded on the container and they're still stuck here in Florida. Oh. So thankfully, my wife, my PA, and a couple of my friends had foresight to fly over, and they moved the vehicles 4,000 miles in 8 days from Florida through Mexico, through all of Central America to Panama. And I broke the world record in the morning, flew over, and an hour later, Alana came in with the keys. So again, as you talked about earlier, Alana very much running everything in the background to keep the campaign going. And what was great about that, not only so much the achievement that they did, but I'd heard about bureaucracy at the borders, but I hadn't witnessed it in South America. That's because it was all to come in Central America. So they got held up at gunpoint in some of the borders and everything else. So for me, it was great knowledge and information going into the next phase. So I would always cycle and make sure I hit the borders at night. So if we are held up, it was eating into my sleep time and not the cycle time. Got through Central America, and then I got to North America day 70, and I'm like, perfect. I'm now 14 days ahead of my target. And I was at, I could take a day's rest if I need to. I didn't realize how big an issue it was getting into America. I didn't know whether it was because of the language, that everyone now spoke my language. I didn't know whether it was the culinary options were a lot better, because, and also maybe because the previous record holders had never had any issues in North America and Canada. I sort of thought I've left everything behind me. Right. An hour after getting in, I had 5 missed calls off Alana, and she's very good at keeping distractions away from me. And my initial concern was my children. Right. So I got onto the phone to her, and she said, "Oh, we've been kindly invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding." I was like, great. So Alana, being Alana, had already worked out for me to get the last flight home was day 102, which was 15 days ahead of the target. So going into the phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind. All my efforts have just been taken away from me, which is, it's very nice to be invited to such a prestigious event. But at
Yeah.
the time, I was cursing. So, but then I got to Lubbock in Texas the next day, and we had 60-mile-an-hour winds and tornadoes, and I was grounded for another 24 hours. So there's an app on your phone called Windy TV, which gives you the strength and directions of the winds,
Right.
forecasted every hour for 2 weeks. And so I just put pen to paper. I just made a plan in that 24 hours. I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to miss the next weather window. And I just played chess with Mother Nature through North America and into Canada. Originally I had 17 days planned for North America. I cycled in 11 and a half. But the luxury I had being in North America and Canada was security. In South America and Central America,
Right.
dictated by first light and last light, and I had to be off the road. Whereas in North America and Canada, I could cycle through the evening. And that's where I got my gains. And I got a week outside in a place called Whitehorse, and the world record was very much secure. The royal wedding was secure unless I was going to get eaten by a grizzly bear. And then I got a phone call about a professional cyclist who's sponsored by all the big brands, Red Bull, Austrian cycling team, who'd just come out on social media that day and said that he was going to cycle the Pan American Highway in August and be the first man to do it under 100 days. So that just changed the dynamics again completely for me. So I cycled for 22 hours in the last 30 hours in minus 18 to make sure that I came in and became the first man in history to do it under 100 days. But the great thing about this, we talk about the importance of planning and everything else. But
Right.
it was actually, you put, as we say in the military, it's best plan in the world till they start shooting back. That wasn't in the plan. It's actually being reactive to the situation on the ground. So for me, the situation kept changing. So rather than getting upset, I just reacted to what was in front of me. If I'd known about the wedding or the cyclist from day one, it may have been too much. You may have pushed yourself too hard. But
Right.
as it was in front of me, I was reacting. Even to the very last 2 days, the plan was changing.
Unbelievable. Share a little bit about how many miles did you average a day?
So I finished it in 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes. I had 5 days off, 3 due to weather and 2 due to logistics. So it worked out 94 days cycling. And
Right.
the average, and that would be an average of 147 miles a day for 94 days. But my average speed was, 16.8 mile an hour. So a lot of people ask me, that's such a huge challenge. How do you break that down mentally? How do you compartmentalize that? And for me, it's a bit like our special forces selection is 6 months long. You don't go on day one thinking about 6 months later getting it, but you think about what's in front of me today. What do I need to achieve today to get where so I'm in a position tomorrow? And that's what I did with this. I broke it into countries, broke the countries into days, and broke the days into stages. So nutrition and hydration were key for me to keep weight on. So I'd have breakfast and I'd just cycle as fast as I could for 2 to 2.5 hours. And I'd get off the bike, have some food and water for 30 minutes. But I was very disciplined in my timings. I was then back on the bike. And all I would do is look at the next 2 hours. I wouldn't look at the afternoon. I wouldn't look at tomorrow or next week. So for me, it was just doing 4 training sessions a day. And before you've done a day, you've done a country, you've done.
I want to go back to that word you just used, discipline. But before we do that, that's so fascinating in that you made it so it would never overwhelm you. It was 2, 2, 2, and 2, 4 times a day.
Yeah.
Which doesn't feel overwhelming when you break it down like that. But if you wake up and say, I got to go do 8 hours, that's 16.8 miles per hour to get through today, that feels a little bit overwhelming.
It does, but I'm very objective driven, so I see people doing other people doing challenges and they're like, well, I'm 10 miles behind today. What I'll do is I'll catch that up tomorrow. Well, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You could have another bad day and be 20 to 30 miles behind, which then plays with your head. So for me, I always made sure I hit my objective for the day, because then when you start the next day, whether you make those extra 2 or 3 phone calls, you're in a good place, you're where you should be the next day, which then helps you. So for me, I think I had really strong wins for the first week, and I was 39 miles behind by the end of the first week. But my target was still a week ahead of the world record. And then once the winds changed, I was then well ahead. So I was then achieving my objective and getting further, which then mentally I was getting stronger and believing I could do more. Before I'd even gone over, I'd never done more than 150 miles. And at the end, you average 147 miles for 94 days. So it's just
How,
believing that you can do it.
I love being, being we all love food. And I
Yeah.
would love your little anecdotes in the book about the food quality in different places. And I especially love when you came into Tim Hortons and you talked about,
Yeah.
just your experience and your love of just running into Tim Hortons and the donuts and the coffee and how many calories, I know you have this measured, were you burning a day and you were having to consume a day to keep going?
So you're averaging between 9 and 12,000 calories you'll burn in a day, but your body can only consume 7,000 through food. So the rest have to come through fluids. So I knew from the start it was almost like an Arctic exploration. I would lose weight from the day I started to the day I finished. I think in America, with the Timmy Hortons, thanks to them, I actually put a bit of weight on, but I don't look like a cyclist. I'm very stocky.
Yeah.
When I started the bike ride, I was 90 kilos, and I remember my coach. If he had it his way, he had me as thin as his pen on day one at 2 to 3% body fat. But again, going into the ride, I had knowledge of my time in the military. Like our special forces selection, 6 months long. If you start 100% fit in pristine condition, you'll burn out week 2 or 3. This isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. So
Right.
I always start at 75 to 80% fitness, but carrying weight, because then what you do is you shed the weight as you get fitter. The first few days are always hard, and then you start eating into your reserves. So I finished the bike ride at 78 kilos. I lost
Wow.
12 kilos in weight. So the decision to keep that weight on early was a good decision.
Um, before we get going, we have Dean Stott with us. You can find Dean at deanstott.com, Dean Stott, STOTT.com. Also, his great book. I've read it twice. I bought 2 cases for my friends, family, and company. This is a great and inspirational book here. And I recommend everybody reading this book. Buy it on Amazon.com, Audible, or anywhere great books are sold. And look at how many places I marked it up. I mean, I just really enjoyed the book. Let's go back. Now you finish up. You made the wedding. Thank
Yeah.
God you made the wedding. Talk about the financial goal. How'd that work out?
So when I crossed the finishing line, we raised, at that point it was over £530,000.
Wow.
Before about 600,000. Before I'd even set off, the company who sponsored me had an annual company meeting in London, and they said, would I come down and guest speak at the O2 Arena in front of 10,000 people? I said, yeah, of course. That evening, they raised £265,000 and doubled it. So
Wow.
before it even gone on the ride, we had 530,000. We then raised another 30,000 through the general public. My PR team, £30,000 is still a great achievement, but they said you're showing no emotion. People like to see people suffering, but when you come on, it's almost like a military operation, and that was me. I didn't want to break down in tears. I crashed the bike in Chile and had food poisoning in Peru. Maybe I should have called it a day, but I was trying to promote that unrelenting pursuit of excellence. But after coming back, we also had the main fundraiser, a big event in the Hilton in London, and Harry came along as a guest on the stage and did a Q&A session, and there we made another few £100,000 as well. But what was interesting was the fact that before I'd even gone on the bike ride, we'd raised £70,000 at an event in Scotland, and £50,000 of that was a deposit for the hotel in London. So before I'd even gone on the bike ride, we were planning the welcome back party. And
Wow.
I remember the events manager, she kept saying to me, she said, well, what is the contingency? And I never used to answer her. And my wife, Alana, would answer her. She said, well, the contingency is we go to Dean's funeral. And
Oh my gosh.
when I got back, actually, I sat down with her and I said, look, I never used to answer because for me, there was no contingency. If I knew there was an easy option or there was an alternative, when things get hard, you will naturally steer to that alternative option. So I just blocked out all my outs. There was no other outcome other than actually doing it. So I told her that, and I think she then got my sort of mindset.
Dean, now I'm sensing something. Now you're sitting today in Southern California. You've moved now over to Southern California, so you're available for speaking events in the United States and also to promote this great book that you have now in the United States, Relentless: The Relentless Pursuit of Excellence. I'm sensing a little bit of a kumbaya here. Wait a second. Harry's moved to Southern California. You've moved to Southern California. Are you guys now moving to Southern California and hanging out together? What's going on? I want to understand. What's this?
Well, actually,
My,
Alana and I, when we met 11 years ago, I was down in San Diego with the SEALs down there doing some
oh,
work, and she'd just done a road trip as well, and we just loved America. We loved the vibe, the
got it.
lifestyle, and it's trying to, and so for us, we were getting really busy again, and we sat down at Christmas and said, well, what is it that's important to us? And it's that balance of the yin and yang with the lifestyle, with the family. So California's always been a place that I'd fancy,
Well,
and obviously there is no good time to move. But moving during a pandemic, wildfires, and on an even election, there's better times to move. But for us, I always joke that I stepped off helicopters into worse. But
we're great. We're very grateful to have you here, and you're going to be a huge success in the U.S. Two questions I have before I let you go today. A, you look still amazing physically fit. What do you do every day now to stay in, shape, ready to go shape?
Yeah, as I touched on earlier, physical activity helps your mental state.
Yeah, agreed.
Lana knows when I get grumpy, get on your bike, go do some CrossFit, do something. So for me, my USP, which sets me aside from other adventures, is I take a challenge or a discipline a sport I've never done before, and find the biggest challenge. So my next challenge, which was penciled for this year, which is obviously now moved because of COVID, is to kayak the River Nile from source to sea, which has never been done before. And I'm also trying to promote people. It's never too late to start sport. I'm 43. I broke my first world record at 41. I'm really trying to get that message across. So I do a little bit of I still stay on the bike. Still do some upper body stuff. I don't do weights. I've never done weights. It's all body weight stuff that I like. Yeah, I always, because in the military, because I always used to say, you used to get tested in the military, but it was never how much can you bench press. It was almost how many pull-ups can you do, how many dips or press-ups. So I thought, well, I'll focus my energies on that.
How level of intensity of difficulty, rate. I want to do compare and contrast now the Pan American Highway Challenge that you did, which obviously you accomplished and beat the world record and now have set the world record, and kayaking the Nile. Compare and contrast.
Yeah, two very different challenges. The Pan American Highway, there was a world record. There was an objective to hit. I had a target to hit.
Right.
The Nile, no one's ever done it. You're setting the benchmark there. So for me, I'm very conscious that I've set my own goals in my head, because I don't want to still be out there 9 months later paddling. I've got a family, but there's more of a story to tell. I won't be tapping my watch with the documentary team, every 5 minutes. If there's something that's of importance to record, then we'll do it. But I have a number in my head, whether it's 100 days again. I'm going to go at 100.
Now, I'm not by any means a Nile River expert, but I have read that there are crocodiles in the Nile River.
Yeah.
This is not just a physical and mental challenge to get your upper body and your cardio and in shape, respiratory in shape to pull this off. You might be navigating very dangerous waters at different times during this period. Is this not true?
No, very true. Yeah, it's the world's longest river. It's 4,280 miles. It starts in Rwanda. You got crocodiles, you got hippos, you got civil war in South Sudan, you got malaria. It's got everything, which again is a great challenge and a great story. But what I love about this challenge, like the Pan American Highway, the road's there, and you just got it's more physical. Whereas this, there's going to be different tribes, different cultures, and you're not going to be able to move along the Nile unless they say so. So having those local fixes, it's going to be great. And I always promote the physical activity, mental state, but with the Nile, it's great. There's so many arms from it, raising awareness of modern slavery and human trafficking, poverty, pollution. The Nile is the lifeline of Africa, and it's got the most powerful waterfall in the world as well. So Yeah.
Will there be a fundraising element around that as well, Dean?
There will be. I'll have a fundraising element, but I won't be so fixated on that, because that
Okay.
can actually very much distract you from the
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. And, Dean, I look forward to meeting you in person. We welcome you to America. We're grateful for your service, fighting for freedom around the world. Do you have any last things you want to promote before I'm going to promote your book at the end here? Is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off? And I'm so grateful for all the time you spent with us today.
No, I appreciate your time, and one of the other reasons I'm over here. One of the feedback from the book is, yes, you're a great endurance athlete, but you are the security expert. Why are you not in that? So that is also one of the reasons I'm here, is sort of to promote another way of skinning the cat when it comes to security, just purely from my experiences around the world, and they've been successful, and I just love to help people, and if I can do that.
For our listeners out there, Relentless. Dean Stott's Relentless. You can get it on Amazon. You can buy it also on Audible or on his website, deanstott.com. The unrelenting pursuit of excellence. You want to inspire others, you give them this book and you tell them, read this book. They will pursue excellence after that. Nothing's impossible if you read this book. Dean Stott, I got to just tell you something. 32 years ago, I moved to California with my family, young family, and my daughter and I used to spend a lot of time. We didn't know anybody. We're in Redondo Beach, and we used to go to a little shop down the street. It was called Good Stuff, and it was the first time she was a little 2-year-old. She saw a man in a wheelchair, and she used to go up to that guy, and he befriended her, and she befriended him, and she became very comfortable around him, and he was just a lovely human being. And this became a ritual every week. And after we had lived here for a year, it was now 1989, I picked up the newspaper one day, and I saw he was on the cover of the July 4th weekend newspaper entertainment section. And it was, I said, what's this guy that we see at the little shop every day on the cover of the entertainment section? And it was a gentleman named Ron Kovic.
Right.
And a movie on his life called Born on the 4th of July had just come out with Tom Cruise playing his life. And I read his story that day, and I watched the movie, and I always said to myself, if I ever have the opportunity to honor the veterans that fight for freedom, fearlessly fight for freedom, I'm going to make use of that platform. And I got lucky in life with business, and I got very lucky and honored with this podcast. And Dean Stott, I am honored and blessed to say that you came on today, graciously came on today, and I'm grateful for you as a human being on what you accomplished fighting for your great country, for freedom and democracy around the world. And what you did post-military is also unbelievably inspiring. You're a great human being. I'm grateful for you. Any way I could introduce you to anybody in this great country, you deserve as much publicity.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. I really appreciate having me on. It's an honor, especially with the first one, the first veteran.
You set a very, very high bar. There's going to be much more to come. We're going to have you back again before you go to the Nile. We're going to have you back, and we're going to have you back, and so you can tell the story of the Nile. I'm sure that's going to be a whole nother book. But thank you again for everything. I can't wait till we receive our books from you. We're going to share it with our company. I'm going to share it with lots of friends and relatives. Continued success, and thank you for all you do, Dean Stott. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. Thank you.